The sound didn't travel far, just a murmur through the crack of the old oak door he'd so carefully hung 8 years ago. But Elias heard it. He heard it with the clarity of a gunshot in a silent room. He had been on his way to the kitchen, a half smile on his face, ready to ask Simone if she wanted tea. He was thinking of their daughter, Amara, asleep in her room, her small chest rising and falling in the soft glow of her butterfly nightlight. He was thinking of their son, Leo, just a toddler, dreaming in his crib. He was thinking of the life they had built within these walls, a life of scraped knees, burnt pancakes, and quiet Sunday mornings. He stopped, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Simone's voice, usually a warm melody, was a low, confidential hum directed at the phone. He knew she was talking to her mother. It was their nightly ritual. "I know, Mother," Simone sighed, a thread of exhaustion in her voice that always surfaced during these calls. "I know the partnership is on the line. I understand the optics." A pause. Elias held his breath, the floorboard suddenly feeling thin as paper beneath his worn slippers. "No, he's not coming. It's a firm event. You know how they are." Another, longer pause. Elias could picture Simone's mother on the other end, her voice like polished steel, asking the questions that always came laced with judgment. Questions about his job at the logistics depot, about their small rental house, about his future, about his worthiness. Then came the words. The 7 words that would cleave his life in two. "Don't worry," Simone said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's just temporary. It's a stepping stone." Temporary. The word hung in the air, a toxic vapor. It seeped through the wood of the door, through the drywall, and into the very marrow of his bones. 8 years, 2 children, a universe of shared moments, the terror of a high fever, the pride of first steps, the quiet comfort of her head on his chest in the dead of night. All of it, in her world, was temporary. A stepping stone. To what? For whom? He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The half-smile on his face had frozen and crumbled to dust. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold tide pulling all the warmth from his body. In the sudden, profound silence of his own heart, he could hear the ticking of the hall clock, each second a hammer blow against the fragile structure of his world. He was not a partner. He was a placeholder. He was not a husband in her heart, but a temporary arrangement, a convenience to be discarded when a better opportunity arose. He was a secret she kept from her real life. The narrator's voice, a quiet promise of the storm to come, would have said it then. And in that moment, his life, as he knew it, ended. And a new one, a harder and more honest one, was about to begin. He backed away from the door, silent as a ghost, the sound of his own shattering world the only thing he could hear. 2 years later, the world was smaller, but it was solid. The rental house was gone, along with Simone and little Leo. She had taken the partnership at the law firm in another city, the one she'd been groomed for by her parents. She had taken Leo, explaining with cold, clinical precision that a toddler needed his mother more. But she had left Amara. Amara, who was her father's daughter in spirit and in heart, who was too observant, too honest, too much a mirror of the life Simone was desperate to leave behind. So Elias's world was now a 2-bedroom apartment in a historically black neighborhood of Oakland, where the scent of grilling meat and the sound of laughter drifted through the open windows on summer evenings. His life was the 5:15 a.m. alarm, the quiet drive to the warehouse, where he managed the morning shift, and the frantic rush to be back for the 3 p.m. school pickup. His life was Amara. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," she said, her voice full of the grave seriousness only a 6-year-old can possess. Elias's large, calloused hands, so adept at managing inventory manifests and operating a forklift, fumbled with the tiny sections of his daughter's hair. Her beautiful coils, rich and dark, slipped through his fingers. He was trying to create the two neat puffs she liked, the ones that bounced when she ran. "I'm trying, sweet pea," he murmured, his brow furrowed in concentration. "My fingers are too big for this." "Mama used to do it better," Amara said, not with malice, but with simple, unvarnished truth. She said it as a statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue. The name landed softly in the quiet room. Elias didn't flinch. They had found a way to talk about her, a way that didn't leave jagged holes in the day. "I know, baby, Mama was good at a lot of things." He finally managed to secure the second elastic band, and the two puffs stood at proud, slightly lopsided attention on either side of her head. He looked at his daughter's reflection in the mirror, her bright, intelligent eyes, her deep brown skin glowing in the morning light, her unwavering stare. She was the anchor that had kept him from drifting away in the flood. "It's okay, Daddy," she said, reaching up to pat his cheek. "You try hard. That's what matters." His heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt. He kissed the top of her head. "You ready for breakfast?" "Pancakes," she squealed, scrambling off her stool. Their life was a rhythm of small, sacred rituals. Burnt pancakes on Wednesdays because he always got distracted. Story time before bed, where he'd do all the voices, his deep baritone rising to a squeak for the mouse and dropping to a rumble for the bear. It was crayon drawings taped to every available surface, colorful, chaotic renderings of butterflies and stars and stick figures. One drawing, her favorite, showed a tall man with brown skin holding the hand of a little black girl with beaded braids. Underneath, in wobbly letters, it said, "My dad and me." Elias was a tall man, with the quiet strength of someone who has carried heavy things for a long time. His work boots were scuffed, his jeans faded, but his shirts were always clean. His short, natural hair was always neatly trimmed. He carried his grief not as a burden to be displayed, but as a quiet space inside him, a room he visited sometimes, but never let his daughter enter. He had lost his wife, his son, and the illusion of the life he thought he had. But he had Amara. And in the small, warm world of their apartment, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of a child's laughter, he was not temporary. He was permanent. He was everything. Miles away, in a glass tower that scraped the San Francisco sky, Naomi Sellers commanded a world made of steel, stock prices, and silent obedience. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, her life was a curated masterpiece of success. Her suits were tailored, her schedule was optimized to the minute, and her face was a mask of serene, unshakable control. She sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, her deep brown skin luminous against the stark white of her blouse. Her natural hair was swept up into an elegant bun, not a single strand out of place. Before her, a dozen executives, mostly men, shifted in their seats, their eyes fixed on her. "The Q3 projections are not just unacceptable," she said, her voice calm and dangerously quiet. "They are a failure of imagination. We are a company that innovates, not iterates. I want new proposals on my desk by Monday, from everyone." There was no argument. There was never an argument. Her word was law. She had built this empire from the ground up, fueled by a ferocious intelligence and an even more ferocious work ethic. She was respected. She was feared. She was profoundly, utterly alone. Later that day, the boardroom empty, Naomi stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her office, looking out at the sprawling city below. The view was breathtaking, a glittering testament to power and commerce. She had owned this view for 5 years. It had never once made her feel happy. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother. "Naomi, darling, your father and I saw the article in Forbes. The Iron Queen of Silicon Valley. Very impressive." "Thank you, Mother," Naomi said, her voice automatically shifting into the clipped, professional tone she reserved for her parents. "We do hope you're making time for your personal life, however. You're not getting any younger." "That nice young man from the merger, Richard. His family has a house in the Hamptons. You should call him." "I'm busy, Mother." "Don't be difficult, Naomi. Success is meaningless without the right person to share it with. You need a partner who reflects your station." Naomi ended the call, a familiar hollowness echoing inside her. Her parents, both accomplished surgeons, had loved her achievements, not her. Her ex-fiancé had loved her portfolio, not her soul. She had never, not once in her 40 years, been loved without conditions. She had never been anyone's choice, only their asset. Her entire life had been a performance, a relentless climb to a summit where she now stood alone, breathing air too thin to sustain a human heart. The Iron Queen, she hated the name. Iron was strong, but it was cold, and it rusted. She walked over to her pristine, minimalist desk and touched the cool marble surface. Nothing in her life was warm. Nothing was soft. Everything was hard, polished, and empty. The rain came down in relentless, driving sheets, turning the city streets into slick, black mirrors. It was late, well past 10, and Naomi's driver had called in sick, a rare miscalculation in her perfectly managed schedule. She was driving herself home from a charity gala, her sleek, foreign sports car a silent beast cutting through the downpour. Then, with a sickening lurch and a series of violent sputters, the beast died. She was stranded. The street was poorly lit, lined with low-slung industrial buildings and small, tightly packed houses. This was not her San Francisco. This was a part of Oakland she only ever saw from her office window, a distant grid of anonymous lights. Her phone, predictably, was dead. She had forgotten to charge it, another unheard-of oversight. She sat in the silent car, the drumming of the rain on the roof, the only sound. For the first time in years, Naomi Sellers was not in control. She felt a prickle of fear, an emotion so foreign she barely recognized it. She was a woman in a $1,000 dress, in a dead $100,000 car, in a neighborhood where she was a conspicuous anomaly. Headlights cut through the gloom. A modest, slightly battered sedan slowed and pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. A man's face, etched with concern, peered out. He was a black man, his features kind, his eyes tired but gentle. "You okay in there?" he called out over the rain. Naomi's first instinct, a lifetime of caution ingrained in her, was to ignore him. But then she looked at his face again. There was no threat there. Only a simple, human decency. "My car, it's broken down," she said, her voice sounding small and thin. "That's no good on a night like this," he said. "Tow trucks will take hours. My place is just around the corner. You can wait there, in the warm. Use my phone to make a call." She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay in the locked car. But the car felt like a cage, and the quiet sincerity in his voice felt like a lifeline. He wasn't looking at her dress or her car. He was looking at her, a person in need of help. "Okay," she heard herself say. The word a surrender. "Thank you." She gathered her silk dress and ran through the pouring rain to his car, the cold drops a shock against her skin. She slid into the passenger seat, shivering. The car smelled faintly of crayons and cinnamon. On the dashboard, a small laminated drawing of a butterfly was taped next to the speedometer. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask what she was doing here. He just drove the short distance to a modest apartment building, parked, and said, "Here we are. It's not the Ritz, but it's dry." The apartment was small, but it was immaculate, and it was alive with a warmth that had nothing to do with the heating. The walls were a gallery of a child's art. A worn but comfortable-looking sofa was draped with a handmade quilt. The air was filled with a quiet peace. "Stay here," Elias said gently. He disappeared and returned with a thick, soft blanket. "You're soaked." He then handed her a steaming mug. "Ginger tea. My daughter says it fixes everything." Naomi wrapped her cold fingers around the warm ceramic. The scent of ginger and honey rose to meet her. She looked at this quiet, gentle man in his simple work clothes, at his home that was so clearly a haven of love, and a strange, unfamiliar pressure built behind her eyes. He hadn't asked for money. He hadn't commented on her expensive clothes or her obvious wealth. He had simply offered kindness, without condition, without expectation. And Naomi Sellers, the Iron Queen of Silicon Valley, sat on a stranger's sofa, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, and began to cry. The sobs were silent, wrenching things that shook her whole body. Elias didn't say a word. He didn't try to comfort her or ask what was wrong. He just sat in a chair across the small room, giving her the dignity of her own grief, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in her storm. A small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, why is the pretty lady crying?" Naomi looked up, her vision blurred with tears. A little girl with two lopsided puffs of hair and wide, curious eyes stood in the hallway, clutching a worn, stuffed elephant. Elias smiled softly. "Amara, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name." "Naomi," she whispered. "This is Naomi, sweet pea." Her car broke down. Amara tiptoed closer. She looked at Naomi's tear-streaked face with an expression of profound empathy. "Is she crying like me when I miss Mama?" The innocent question was a blade that cut straight to the heart of a pain Naomi hadn't even known she was feeling. Yes, she was crying because she missed something she'd never had. A mother's unconditional love, a home that felt safe. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad too," Elias said, his voice gentle. Amara nodded sagely. She walked right up to the sofa, held out her stuffed elephant, and placed it in Naomi's lap. "Ellie will make you feel better," she announced. "He's very good at cuddles." Naomi stared at the child, then at the stuffed elephant. She pulled the worn toy to her chest and let out a shaky breath that was half a sob, half a laugh. In that moment, the sterile, empty penthouse and the high-stakes boardroom felt a million miles away. She was in a small apartment in Oakland, holding a stuffed elephant, being cared for by a 6-year-old girl and her quiet, kind father. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt safe. The car, it turned out, needed a specialized part that would take several days to arrive. Naomi, accustomed to solving any problem with a phone call and a credit card, was uncharacteristically helpless. Elias, without a hint of imposition, offered to drive her. To her office in the morning, back in the evening. "It's no trouble," he insisted, when she tried to refuse. Offering him money, he politely declined. "It's on my way to Amara's school. We can't have you stranded." So began a strange and wonderful routine. Each morning, Elias's humble sedan would pull up to her glittering high-rise, a stark contrast to the black town cars that usually idled there. Each evening, he would drive her back, away from the world of power and into his world of warmth. Amara would be in the back seat, chattering away, her beaded braids clicking softly as she moved. She'd ask Naomi about her day, not about stock prices, but about whether she'd seen any cool birds from her window. One evening, Naomi came back to the apartment with him to wait for a call from the mechanic. Amara was sitting at the small kitchen table, surrounded by crayons. "I'm making a new family picture," she announced. Naomi smiled and peered over her shoulder. Amara had drawn 3 stick figures. One was very tall, with short scribbled black hair. The next was small, with lines radiating from her head that had little circles on the end. The third was a woman in a bright blue dress. "Let me guess," Naomi said, pointing. "That's your daddy." "Yep," Amara said. "He's a tall man with brown skin." "And that's you." "Yep, a little black girl with braids and beads." Naomi's finger hovered over the third figure. "And who is this?" Amara looked up at her, her eyes shining with an unshakable certainty. "That's you, silly. You have brown skin and a pretty dress. You're part of our family now." She tore the drawing from the pad and held it out to Naomi. A gift. A declaration. Naomi took the paper, her hands trembling slightly. The simple drawing felt heavier, more valuable, than any stock certificate or acquisition deal she had ever held. It was an invitation into a world she had only ever observed from a distance, a world of belonging. She looked from the drawing to Elias, who was standing in the kitchen doorway watching them, a small, unreadable smile on his face. He had heard. That night, after Amara was asleep, they sat in the quiet living room. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, filled with the unspoken things that had been growing between them. "She's an amazing kid," Naomi said softly, looking at the drawing she'd carefully placed on the coffee table. "She's the best part of me," Elias said. He looked down at his hands, the calluses a map of his life's labor. "She gets her honesty from her mother." It was the first time he'd mentioned her. Naomi waited. "We were together for 8 years, he said, his voice low and even. "I thought we were building a life, a forever. But to her family, I was a temporary solution, a stepping stone to something better." He didn't say it with anger, but with a deep, settled sorrow, the ache of a wound that had scarred over, but still pulled tight. She found something better. Naomi felt a profound sense of recognition, being valued for your utility, being a means to an end. "My whole life has been a performance," she confessed, the words spilling out into the safe, dim light of the apartment. "For my parents, for my partners, I was the brilliant daughter, the power fiancé. My accomplishments were the only part of me they ever seemed to love. I don't think anyone has ever just seen me, the person underneath the title." He looked up, and his eyes met hers. They were dark, deep, and filled with a quiet understanding that went beyond words. "I see you, Naomi," he said, and the simple words landed in her soul like rain on parched earth. In the shared silence that followed, 2 lonely people from 2 different worlds saw their own pain reflected in the other's eyes and felt, for the first time, a little less alone. The world has a way of trying to smash beautiful, fragile things. The first stone was thrown by a rival on Naomi's board, a man named Marcus Thorne, who had always resented her power. A photographer he'd hired had captured a shot of Naomi, dressed in her power suit, getting into Elias's old sedan one morning. The photo was anonymous, grainy, but the implication was clear. It was circulated among the board members with a note: "Concerns about our CEO's judgment and associations." The second, heavier stone was thrown by Simone. She had heard through the grapevine, the small, interconnected world of wealthy families, that a powerful CEO was spending time with her ex, with her daughter. Jealousy, or perhaps a primal fear of being replaced, coiled in her gut. The legal letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was cold, brutal, and written on the letterhead of a prestigious family law firm. Simone was petitioning for full custody of Amara. The grounds were flimsy but cruel. Elias's unstable living situation, his modest income, and most damningly, his irresponsible introduction of a transient stranger into the child's life. The word transient was a deliberate, vicious echo of the word temporary. The letter shattered the quiet peace of Elias's world. The fear it ignited was cold and absolute. The thought of losing Amara, the one solid thing in his universe, was unbearable. He withdrew, his quiet warmth replaced by a guarded, anxious energy. When Naomi called, he was distant. "I can't, Naomi," he said, his voice strained. "This is too complicated. I have to protect my daughter." Naomi understood. He was a father first. But the distance felt like a physical blow. The small, warm world they had started to build was being threatened from all sides. Her board was whispering. His ex was attacking. The chasm between their lives, which had seemed to vanish in the quiet moments, was now a gaping canyon. She sat in her vast, empty office, the city lights twinkling indifferently below, and felt the old, familiar cold seeping back into her bones. The world was telling them they didn't belong together. It was telling her that she was a liability, a danger to the very people who had made her feel whole. The emergency board meeting was held in the main conference room. The air was thick with tension. Marcus Thorne, smug and self-satisfied, stood to address the room. "We have all seen the reports," he began, his voice dripping with false concern. "While I have the utmost respect for Miss Sellers' professional acumen, her recent personal choices raise serious questions about her stability and judgment. The CEO of a company like ours cannot afford to be seen in such compromising situations." He projected the grainy photo onto the large screen. Naomi getting into Elias's car. The image was meant to shame her, to paint her as reckless. All eyes turned to Naomi. They expected a denial, a defense, an explanation. She stood up, her posture as regal and unyielding as ever. But her eyes, for the first time, held no armor. They were open, vulnerable, and fiercely, incandescently alive. "You are correct, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing through the silent room. "That is me, getting into the car of a man who lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland, a man who manages a warehouse for a living." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. "You see this as a compromising situation, a lapse in judgment? You see a liability," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the board members. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a man who works 12-hour days and still has the energy to try and learn how to braid his daughter's hair. I see a father whose entire world is the light in his little girl's eyes. I see a man who, when he found a stranger stranded in the rain, offered her shelter and warmth and asked for nothing in return." Her voice grew stronger, filled with a passion that stunned them into silence. "For years, I have lived in your world, a world of net worth and stock prices and strategic alliances, a world that measures a person's value by the car they drive or the title on their business card. And I've learned more about true value in the last 2 weeks, in that small apartment, than I have in 20 years in this boardroom." She looked directly at the projected image, at the memory of that morning. That man, Elias, and his daughter, Amara, they didn't see a CEO, they didn't see a balance sheet, they saw a person, they saw me, and in seeing me, they saved me from this. She gestured around the room at the cold marble, the sterile glass, the faces of people who knew her name, but not her soul. "You are worried about my judgment. Let me put your minds at ease. My judgment has never been clearer. This company, this title, this office, it's a job. That man and his little girl, they are a life. They are my life." She took a deep breath, a final cleansing act. "So I will save you the trouble of a vote of no confidence. Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Sellers Innovations. She turned not to the board, but to her own reflection in the vast window. For the first time, the woman staring back was not the Iron Queen. It was just Naomi, and she was free. Without another word, she walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a stunned silence and the wreckage of a world she no longer wanted. Elias was sitting on the steps of his apartment building when her taxi pulled up. He had heard the news. It was already spreading like wildfire through the financial channels. He stood up as she walked toward him, her face stripped of all its corporate armor. She looked tired and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Naomi," he breathed, his voice thick with disbelief. "What did you do?" "I chose," she said simply, stopping in front of him. "I chose the world that has warmth in it, the one with the crayon drawings on the walls." He stared at her, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her sacrifice. She had torn down her empire for him, for them. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. "Yes, I did," she said, her eyes filling with tears. But these were not tears of sadness. "Don't you see? It was never a sacrifice. It was a rescue. I was the one who was stranded, Elias, not just in the rain." She took a shaky breath. "I just want to stay, if you'll have me." He didn't answer with words. He closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the world. She buried her face in his chest, her body relaxing into his embrace, as if she had finally, after a lifetime of searching, come home. The legal threat from Simone vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Naomi, it turned out, still had a very good lawyer on retainer. A single quiet phone call was made, pointing out the baselessness of the claim and the considerable resources that would be brought to bear to fight it. Simone, a bully at heart, folded instantly when faced with a power greater than her own. Later that evening, they sat on the small balcony overlooking the street. The air was cool, the sky a deep velvet purple. Amara, in her pajamas, came out and, without a word, snuggled between them, taking one of each of their hands in her own small ones. They sat in a comfortable, perfect silence, a small, unlikely constellation under the Oakland sky, their three hands linked together, forming a circle of belonging. 3 months later, the world was a different shape. Naomi hadn't returned to the corporate world. Instead, she'd used her considerable resources to start a foundation that provided arts education for children in underserved communities. She worked from the small second bedroom in Elias's apartment, her laptop now sharing a desk with jars of paint and stacks of construction paper. Her days were no longer about quarterly reports, but about watching a child's face light up when they discovered the color purple. She had never felt so rich. They were at the park on a bright Saturday afternoon. Elias was pushing Amara on the swings, her laughter pealing through the air, her beaded braids flying out behind her. Naomi sat on a nearby bench, a soft, genuine smile on her face, watching them, watching her family. Elias slowed the swing and walked over to the bench, his eyes full of a light Naomi had never seen before. He sat beside her, his hand finding hers. "I have something for you," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. He reached into his pocket, and for a wild second, Naomi's heart stuttered, thinking of rings and boxes. But what he pulled out was something far more precious. It was a piece of paper, slightly crumpled and softened with time. It was Amara's drawing. The 3 stick figures. The tall man, the little girl, and the woman in the blue dress. "Amara had a question she wanted me to ask you," he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, at his dear, honest face. Just then, Amara came running up to them, her face flushed with happiness. She stopped in front of Naomi, her expression full of childhood gravity. "Naomi," she asked, her voice clear as a bell, "does this mean you're staying forever?" The question hung in the sun-drenched air, simple, profound, and holding the weight of all their futures. Naomi looked from the daughter to the father, her heart overflowing with a love so pure and powerful it left her breathless. She knelt down to be at eye level with the little girl who had first opened the door to her heart. "Yes, Amara," she whispered, a joyful tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Forever." And as Elias's hand tightened around hers, Naomi knew that true wealth wasn't something you acquired. It was something you were invited into. Family wasn't about blood or contracts. It was a deliberate choice, made every day, to show up, to care, to stay. Love was not a stepping stone, but the destination itself. And the greatest treasure in the entire world was not to be admired, or feared, or valued, but to simply finally be seen.